For nearly a decade, American television was enchanted by a simple tale told with outrageous charm. A poor mountain family, unpolished and wide-eyed, strikes oil and finds themselves uprooted to the manicured lawns and marble mansions of Beverly Hills. It sounds like a fairy tale wrapped in comedy, but the Beverly Hillbillies was more than just a humorous escape. It became a cultural juggernaut. Viewers tuned in by the tens of millions, week after week, not just for the laughs but for the warmth, the strangeness, the unlikely wisdom of characters who seemed both absurd and oddly profound. But as we rewind the tape, as we move beyond the slapstick and the catchy theme song that played on every living room screen, we find stories far more complicated than the sitcom ever revealed. Behind the curtain of this light-hearted show were actors whose personal journeys were filled with longing, betrayal, ambition, and deep shadows. Some found purpose in fame. Others were consumed by it. And there were those who smiled on set while battling heartbreak the world never saw. The ones we loved on screen carried with them private struggles and quiet tragedies that never made it into the script. There were moments of joy, yes, but also loneliness, illnesses kept secret, friendships that fractured over time, and exits from this world that came too suddenly, or perhaps too silently. As the show faded into reruns, so did the spotlight on many of its stars. And yet, their stories, raw, real, sometimes controversial, deserve to be heard. Today, we look back not just at the success of the Beverly Hillbillies, but at the lives of the people who gave it breath and meaning. They made us laugh, they made us feel, and now, many of them have left us. But what did they leave behind? How did fame shape them? Who rose above it, and who fell under its weight? What are these actors doing now? The answer lies in memory, in history, and in the haunting truth that even the brightest smiles often carry the deepest silence. Join us as we rediscover the voices behind the laughter, and uncover the untold stories of the stars who are no longer with us. Buddy Ebsen, 1908 to 2003. He was never meant to be a superstar. In fact, in the early days, Buddy Ebsen often found himself just outside the spotlight, a lanky dancer with a quiet presence and a voice that carried more kindness than command. Born Christian Ludolf Ebsen Jr. in Belleville, Illinois, he grew up far from the glamour of Hollywood. His father taught dance, and from a young age Buddy learned to move with grace and rhythm, never imagining those steps would eventually carry him into the living rooms of millions. When he came to Hollywood, it was the dream, but the dream almost killed him. Cast as the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz, Buddy rehearsed tirelessly and wore the silver makeup that was supposed to make him shine. Instead, it poisoned his lungs. He collapsed. He was replaced. MGM never even apologized. That heartbreak haunted him, a private scar behind every future smile. By the time the Beverly Hillbillies came to him, Buddy was already in his 50s, an age when many actors fade quietly into supporting roles. But something about Jed Clampett fit him perfectly. Maybe it was the calm, the patience, the eyes that had seen too much and yet still believed in simple wisdom. Jed wasn't just a character. He was a refuge. The show exploded into success, and suddenly Buddy Ebsen became a household name, the face of rural decency in a world spinning too fast. But off-camera, his life was far more complex. He was fiercely opinionated and politically outspoken, a quality that led to public tensions with co-star Nancy Kulp. When she ran for Congress, he shocked many by endorsing her opponent. That moment revealed a deeper truth about Buddy: he was not afraid to burn bridges if he believed in the cause. Fame had not softened him. After the Beverly Hillbillies ended, Buddy didn't slow down. He reinvented himself yet again as a television detective in Barnaby Jones. Audiences loved him in the role, and once more he proved that longevity in Hollywood was not about chasing trends, but about staying true to oneself. In his later years, he took up painting, writing, and even published a novel. Behind the scenes, he was a devoted father and husband, though his personal relationships were not without their complications. He passed away in 2003, at the age of 95. No scandal marked his end, no dramatic fall from grace. Just a long, quiet goodbye from a man who had lived many lives under many lights. To most, he will always be Jed Clampett, tipping his hat and smiling with humble wisdom. But for those who look deeper, Buddy Ebsen was something far rarer, a man who survived Hollywood with his soul intact. Irene Ryan, 1902 to 1973. She wasn't young when stardom found her. In fact, by the time Irene Ryan became a household name, she had already spent decades working in vaudeville, radio, and film. For years she had been the woman behind the microphone, the comic sidekick, the one with the sharp timing and selfless delivery. Hollywood rarely offered the spotlight to older women, and almost never to ones without the conventional glamour. But when the Beverly Hillbillies premiered, everything changed. Suddenly, Irene Ryan became America's granny. Born in El Paso, Texas in 1902, Irene's early life was filled with motion. She was performing on stage before she was 20, married young, and by the 1930s she had carved out a reputation as a radio comedienne. Her voice was her greatest tool, raspy, feisty, and filled with perfect comedic bite. She appeared on Bob Hope's radio show regularly and even toured with him during World War II, entertaining troops who roared with laughter at her bold punchlines. But nothing she had done before prepared her for Granny Daisy Mosers. She wasn't just a background character. She was the storm in every scene, the fiery matriarch who carried a rifle in one hand and a cast-iron skillet in the other. Irene brought to life a woman who was equal parts absurd and authentic, an unfiltered elder who stole every moment with raw energy and undeniable charm. Audiences didn't just laugh at Granny, they loved her. Yet few knew that behind the performance, Irene was a deeply private person. She never remarried after her divorce and had no children. She kept her personal life close, rarely appearing in tabloids or interviews beyond what was required. And then, just 2 years after the Beverly Hillbillies ended, tragedy struck. While performing in a Broadway play, she suffered a stroke. Diagnosed shortly after with a brain tumor, she passed away within months, at the age of 70. Her death shocked fans who had never imagined the woman who brought Granny to life could disappear so suddenly. There were no drawn-out goodbyes, no public farewell. One moment she was taking her final bow on stage, and the next, she was gone. But her legacy remains. Irene Ryan proved that age could be power, that comedy could be commanding, and that sometimes, the loudest voices in a room come from those who had waited the longest to be heard. Donna Douglas, 1932 to 2015. She had the look of a southern dream. Blonde hair cascading down her shoulders, eyes wide with wonder, a smile as warm as sunshine on a front porch swing. Donna Douglas didn't just play Ellie Mae Clampett, she became the fantasy of a generation. Innocent yet capable, playful yet tough, Ellie Mae was the kind of girl who could wrestle a bear cub and still blush when offered a compliment. And behind that charm was a woman who understood exactly what it meant to survive in an industry that often prized beauty over soul. Born Doris Smith in Baton Rouge, Louisiana in 1932, Donna grew up far from the glitter of Hollywood. She was a tomboy at heart, raised with a strong faith and Southern values. She didn't come to Los Angeles with a resume. She came with a pageant crown and a determination to succeed. After winning Miss Baton Rouge and Miss New Orleans, she took a leap of faith and moved west. In the late 1950s, the film and television world was flooded with hopeful blondes. Most were never heard from again. But Donna Douglas had something they didn't: purity, poise, and a stubborn refusal to compromise. Her casting as Ellie Mae was lightning in a bottle. She was only 30 when the show premiered, and the role fit her like second skin. She didn't have to fake her love for animals. In fact, she often brought stray cats and dogs to the set. Fans adored her, but fame didn't change her. She refused to do nude scenes, turned down provocative roles, and stuck fiercely to her values. That decision earned her respect from many, but it also cost her opportunities in a business that didn't reward restraint. After the Beverly Hillbillies ended, Donna struggled to find another role that fit her as perfectly as Ellie Mae. Offers came, but none that felt right. She turned toward gospel music, Christian children's books, and eventually became a traveling speaker for faith-based events. She even filed a lawsuit in the 1990s against the makers of Sister Act, claiming it had been based on a screenplay she had written. The case was dismissed, but it revealed a woman still fighting to be heard in a world that had once adored her and then moved on. Donna Douglas passed away in 2015 after a quiet battle with pancreatic cancer. She was 82. She never remarried after her divorce, and lived most of her later years surrounded by family, faith, and animals she loved. To millions, she will always be the barefoot beauty from the Clampett clan. But behind that gentle presence was a woman of steel, unshakable in her beliefs, unbending in her morals, and unforgettable to those who truly knew her. Raymond Bailey, 1904 to 1980. He played a man obsessed with money, power, and prestige, but Raymond Bailey was never a man consumed by fame. In fact, he spent most of his life in pursuit of something far more elusive than wealth, a place to belong. As Mr. Drysdale, the ever-anxious banker of the Beverly Hillbillies, he became the perfect caricature of capitalist desperation. But off-screen, he was far more quiet, far more withdrawn, and far more tragic than the character he portrayed. Born in San Francisco in 1904, Bailey's early life was filled with disappointment. His first attempts at acting in Hollywood failed so miserably that he gave up and fled to New York. When that didn't work, he boarded a ship and traveled the world, working odd jobs, living in near poverty, and still dreaming of one day making it back to the screen. It took years before anyone would listen. And when they finally did, it wasn't with fanfare. It was with small parts, brief appearances, roles that barely left an impression. But he stayed. He endured. By the time the Beverly Hillbillies came calling, Raymond Bailey was nearly 60. A lesser man might have seen the role of a greedy banker as beneath him. But Bailey saw something deeper, a satire, a mirror to a society obsessed with image and wealth. He brought to Mr. Drysdale not just comedic timing, but subtlety, nervousness, even a kind of sadness. He made the character real, even when the world around him was outrageous. Colleagues described him as professional, quiet, sometimes aloof. He rarely engaged in the backstage drama, rarely gave interviews, and almost never spoke about his private life. Some said he was lonely. Others said he was simply private. But there was always a certain melancholy in his eyes, even when delivering the biggest laugh. After the show ended, Bailey did not seek the spotlight again. He had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and as the illness progressed, he withdrew from acting completely. His final years were spent in near obscurity, far from the studios and the fans who once adored him. In 1980, he passed away at the age of 75, his death receiving little media attention, a quiet end to a man who once made millions laugh. Raymond Bailey's legacy is bittersweet. He made his mark not with volume, but with precision. Not with flash, but with depth. And while Mr. Drysdale may have been desperate to keep the Clampetts' fortune in his vault, Bailey himself seemed to understand that the richest lives are often the most quietly lived. Nancy Culp, 1921 to 1991. She never fit the mold, and she never tried to. Nancy Culp was tall, sharp-featured, and carried herself with the unshakable grace of someone who knew she was different, and chose to be proud of it. As Miss Jane Hathaway on the Beverly Hillbillies, she portrayed a woman constantly caught between two worlds. Loyal to her employer Mr. Drysdale, yet clearly fascinated, even enamored, by the Clampetts and their simple, unpretentious way of life. Her character was intelligent, compassionate, often the voice of reason in the chaos. But in real life, Nancy's journey was far more courageous than television ever allowed her to be. Born in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania in 1921, Nancy's early life was far from Hollywood. She served in the Navy during World War II, earning the rank of lieutenant, and only afterward turned to acting. Hollywood didn't know quite what to do with her. She wasn't glamorous in the conventional sense. She wasn't a blonde bombshell or a damsel in distress. But what she had was intelligence, razor-sharp wit, and the ability to command attention with a single look. Her performance as Jane Hathaway was both comedic and quietly radical. She played a career woman at a time when most female characters on television were confined to kitchens and love triangles. And though her character's affections for Jethro Bodine were played for laughs, there was always something deeper underneath, a vulnerability, a longing, a question of whether someone like her would ever find true connection. Behind the scenes, Nancy Culp was known as kind, professional, and fiercely independent. She never married, and in later years, she would become a quiet icon for the LGBTQ+ community, though she never publicly declared her sexuality. In 1984, long after the show ended, she ran for Congress in Pennsylvania. That campaign would expose a painful chapter in her personal life. Buddy Ebsen, her former co-star, publicly endorsed her opponent. The betrayal hurt, and the loss stung even more. She never returned to politics. In 1990, Nancy was diagnosed with cancer. She faced it with the same quiet dignity she had shown throughout her life. She passed away in 1991 at the age of 69. There were no grand tributes, no major headlines. Just a handful of obituaries for a woman who had defied expectations her entire life. Nancy Culp's legacy is not in the punchlines, but in the presence. She carved space for women who didn't fit the mold. She lived authentically, bravely, and without apology. And in doing so, she gave television, and the world, a new definition of strength. Bea Benaderet, 1906 to 1968. She was the kind of actress who made everything around her better. You might not have known her name at first, but you always remembered her voice, her presence, the way she brought warmth and wit into any role she touched. Bea Benaderet didn't need to be center stage to shine. For decades, she stood just to the side of the spotlight, quietly stealing scenes, quietly building one of the most remarkable careers in early American television. And then, as the world began to notice, as her long-awaited moment finally arrived, time ran out. Born in New York City in 1906, Bea was a performer from the very start. Her family moved to San Francisco when she was still a child, and by her teens, she was already acting on radio. It was there that her voice became legendary. She played dozens of characters across countless shows, often uncredited, often unrecognized, but always unforgettable. When animation entered the picture, Bea's voice was everywhere. From Betty Rubble in the Flintstones to countless roles for Warner Brothers cartoons. She could sound sweet, shrill, elegant, or absurd. She had range most actors could only dream of. Her role as Cousin Pearl Bodine in the Beverly Hillbillies was brief but brilliant. Pearl was meddlesome, dramatic, always scheming to find a husband for her son Jethro or herself. Bea infused her with humor, humanity, and heart. The character might have been exaggerated, but the performance was grounded in truth. Audiences loved her, and industry insiders praised her timing, her instincts, her command. What many didn't know was that Bea was battling illness even during the peak of her fame. She had been diagnosed with lung cancer, a devastating blow to a woman who had worked tirelessly for more than 30 years. She continued to act as long as her body would allow. Even as her health declined, she refused to stop. She was the lead of another hit show, Petticoat Junction, until her condition forced her to step away. In October of 1968, Bea Benaderet passed away at the age of 62, leaving behind a grieving cast, a shocked audience, and a void that could not be filled. Her death was a quiet tragedy in an industry that often forgets too fast. But those who worked with her never forgot. Lucille Ball once said Bea was the best second lead in the business. And maybe that was true. But to those who knew the depth of her talent and the kindness she carried behind the scenes, Bea Benaderet was more than a second lead. She was the heart of every ensemble, the unsung hero of a golden age, and a reminder that greatness doesn't always come in the loudest voice or the biggest role. Sometimes, it's in the woman who shows up, does the work, and leaves a legacy that whispers long after the credits roll. Frank Cady, 1915 to 2012. He was never the star, but somehow he was always there. Frank Cady had the kind of face you trusted. A quiet familiarity, a voice that sounded like the morning paper and black coffee. As Sam Drucker, the owner of the general store in the Beverly Hillbillies, he became a cornerstone of comfort in a world that often felt surreal. He didn't shout. He didn't chase attention. He simply stood his ground with a half-smile and a steady tone, reminding viewers that even the strangest towns needed someone to keep the shelves stocked and the gossip flowing. Born in Susanville, California in 1915, Frank was raised far from the studio lights. He studied journalism, not drama, and spent his early adult years in World War II, serving as a medical assistant in England and France. After the war, he returned to California and slowly worked his way into television. Never flashy, never controversial, Frank Cady was the kind of actor producers loved: reliable, versatile, humble. And so he worked. And kept working. Until one day, he wasn't just Sam Drucker in the Beverly Hillbillies. He was also Sam Drucker in Petticoat Junction. And Sam Drucker in Green Acres. For nearly a decade, he was the only actor to appear regularly on all three interconnected shows, forming the heart of what fans called the Hooterville universe. Unlike many of his co-stars, Frank's life was remarkably free of scandal or sadness. He married once and stayed married for nearly 6 to 7 years. He had children, a home outside Hollywood, and a reputation as one of the kindest men in the business. He never sought fame beyond what it gave him. He never tried to reinvent himself or chase the spotlight. He was content, it seemed, with the life he had built. In 1990, he retired from acting. In his final years, he rarely gave interviews, preferring instead to spend time with his family in Oregon. When he passed away in 2012 at the age of 96, it felt like the closing of a quiet chapter in television history. No scandals. No controversies. Just a long, steady career filled with decency, humor, and grace. Frank Cady may not have been the kind of actor who made headlines, but he made something for more important: memories. He was the steady hand, the trusted voice, the familiar presence in a world of absurdity. And sometimes, that is the greatest role of all. Elvia Allman, 1904 to 1992. She was the kind of actress whose face you might not remember at first, but once you heard her voice, it never left you. Sharp, deliberate, tinged with authority and mischief, Elvia Allman was never meant to be a leading lady. She knew that. And still, she carved out a place in entertainment history through sheer force of character, becoming one of the most prolific and reliable voices in radio and television's golden age. In the Beverly Hillbillies, she appeared as various high society women, often snooty, sometimes ridiculous, always unforgettable. And in doing so, she helped define the satirical edge that made the show so beloved. Born in North Carolina in 1904, Elvia began her career long before the television era. She trained in voice and elocution, becoming a radio personality when the medium was still young. Her ability to switch between characters, accents, and moods made her a favorite among early broadcasters. At a time when women's roles in media were often limited to sidekicks and homemakers, Elvia created a gallery of sharp-tongued matrons, anxious secretaries, and nosy neighbors who could steal scenes without raising their voices. Her transition into television was seamless. She appeared on shows like I Love Lucy, the Jack Benny program, and the Beverly Hillbillies, often playing characters that poked fun at the very world of wealth and status they were supposed to represent. In the Beverly Hillbillies, her portrayals of wealthy society women clashing with the Clampetts were layered with irony. She understood the satire and played into it perfectly, making her performances both comedic and biting. Off-camera, Elvia lived a quiet, dignified life. She never courted scandal, never made headlines for personal drama. She was known as a consummate professional, generous with younger actors, and always ready to show up and deliver. Her work ethic was legendary, and even in her later years, she continued to perform, taking roles in films and television well into her 80s. In 1992, she passed away from pneumonia at the age of 87. Her death went largely unnoticed in the entertainment press, a quiet end for a woman whose voice had once filled homes across America. But for those who remembered, Elvia Allman was a treasure, one of the last true voices of radio, and a pioneer who bridged the gap between the sound stage and the sitcom. In a world that often forgets the women who build it from behind the scenes, Elvia's story reminds us that impact is not always measured in fame. Sometimes, it's measured in the way a single line, delivered just right, can change the tone of a scene, or the memory of a generation. Gloria Marshall, 1931 to 1994. She arrived on screen like a whisper, brief, beautiful, almost ethereal. Gloria Marshall's appearances in the Beverly Hillbillies were not central to the plot, not the kind of roles that win awards or linger in the minds of critics. But in a show that thrived on eccentricity and contrast, her poised presence added a subtle elegance. She often played secretaries, stewardesses, or elegant passers-by. The kind of roles given to women whose beauty was expected to speak louder than their voices. And yet, there was something about Gloria that made you look twice. Born in 1931, Gloria Marshall entered Hollywood during a time when image was everything. She had the look, striking features, soft sophistication, and she was cast accordingly. Like many actresses of the era, she was often handed roles that served as decoration, not character. But she delivered each one with poise, professionalism, and a quiet sense of humor. Whether she was sharing a brief exchange with Jed Clampett or reacting to Granny's antics, she gave her characters more presence than the script required. Her career spanned across multiple television shows in the 1950s and 60s. Appearances in series like Adventures of Superman and Perry Mason gave her steady work, though never the breakout role she might have hoped for. Hollywood had a way of typecasting women like Gloria, beautiful, refined, but never quite allowed to show depth. Off-screen, she lived a private life, far from the scandals and publicity that devoured many of her contemporaries. There were no big headlines when Gloria left the screen. No farewell interviews or retrospectives. She simply stopped appearing, as quietly as she had arrived. In 1994, she passed away at the age of 63. The cause was not widely publicized. There were no obituaries in major papers. Just a name added to a list of forgotten faces. Faces that once lit up black and white screens in millions of homes. But her story is not one of failure. It is one of quiet endurance. Gloria Marshall was one of countless women who held up the edges of American television, whose contributions may have gone uncelebrated but were never unimportant. In every brief glance and silent pause, she reminded us that not all impact needs a monologue. Sometimes, it just needs presence. Jim Varney, 1949 to 2000. He made people laugh with just a glance, a raised eyebrow, or a southern drawl that seemed too exaggerated to be real. But Jim Varney was never just a clown. Beneath the over-the-top expressions and slapstick charm was a classically trained actor, a man whose soul longed for Shakespeare but whose fame came wearing denim overalls and delivering one-liners. To most of the world, he was Ernest P. Worrell, the bumbling everyman of 1,000 commercials and a dozen movies. But in 1993, he took on a new role, Jed Clampett, in the big-screen adaptation of the Beverly Hillbillies, stepping into boots once worn by Buddy Ebsen himself. It was no small task. Fans of the original series were skeptical. Replacing a legend was dangerous work. But Jim brought something fresh. His Jed was softer, gentler, perhaps less grounded in realism but rooted in the same humble decency. He didn't try to mimic Ebsen. He honored him. And in doing so, he brought the character to a new generation, even as critics remained divided. Born in Lexington, Kentucky in 1949, Jim was a gifted child, reading at a high level by age 5 and reciting long passages from literature with ease. He studied acting seriously, even playing Hamlet on stage before the role of Ernest took over his life. The Ernest franchise brought him fame, money, and a kind of cult admiration. But it also became a cage. The industry couldn't see past it. Directors didn't trust his range. His true abilities were masked by the caricature. Off-camera, Jim was thoughtful, generous, and far more introspective than most people realized. He loved poetry, classical music, and had a deep appreciation for literature. Friends described him as loyal but lonely. He smoked heavily, a habit he could never break. In 1998, he was diagnosed with lung cancer. He kept working through the pain, even recording his final voice role as Slinky Dog in Toy Story 2 while undergoing treatment. He passed away in 2000 at the age of 50. Too young. Too soon. And still, even in his last years, he never stopped trying to show the world that he was more than Ernest. That he was an actor. A real one. One who had something to say, if only the world would listen. Jim Varney's performance as Jed Clampett may not have been the most celebrated, but it was full of heart. It was his way of paying tribute to the show that defined a generation. And in that, he joined the legacy, not as a replacement, but as a continuation. A final bow from a man who spent his life chasing laughter, but who deserved so much more. The story of the Beverly Hillbillies is more than a sitcom frozen in the black and white glow of nostalgia. It is a time capsule, a living photograph of an America that once believed in simpler values, louder laughter, and the power of family, no matter how mismatched or misunderstood. But behind that image are lives, real, complicated, often painful, that remind us how fleeting fame can be and how enduring human spirit truly is. Some of the actors we revisited today lived long, fulfilling lives, filled with second chances and quiet dignity. Others left far too soon, their last moments dimmed by illness, disappointment, or the deafening silence of an industry that had moved on. But each of them, whether in a starring role or a fleeting cameo, left a fingerprint on the culture, a spark that made the Beverly Hillbillies not just entertaining, but unforgettable. Buddy Ebsen gave us steadiness. Irene Ryan gave us fire. Donna Douglas gave us sweetness, Raymond Bailey precision, Nancy Culp defiance. Bea Benadryt brought warmth, Frank Cady brought constancy, and Elvia Allman brought wit sharpened with age. Gloria Marshall gave us beauty with grace, and Jim Varney, in a final echo, reminded us that even in a new era, the heart of the Clampetts could still beat. These were not just performers. They were artists, survivors, quiet rebels who navigated a world that offered them both adoration and cruelty. Some died in hospital beds, others in obscurity. A few were mourned by millions, others only by close friends and silent screens. But in every laugh they sparked and every line they delivered, they offered us a piece of themselves. And that is something death can never erase. So the next time you hear that familiar banjo tune, or catch a rerun playing late at night, pause for a moment. Remember the faces. Think of the lives lived behind those smiles. The triumphs, the regrets, the battles won and lost. Because they are not just gone. They are waiting to be remembered. And if you, like us, believe that their stories deserve to live on, then subscribe to our channel. There are more memories waiting. More voices to uncover. And more echoes from the past that still deserve to be heard.